Robert Fox is defense editor at London Evening Standard. Welcome to our program, Mr. Fox.
Hello.
Russian dictator Vladimir Putin has agreed to partial ceasefire in the air, according to the US President Donald Trump. However, Russia continues to attack Ukraine with missiles and drones right now. What is your assessment of the results of this phone call between Trump and Vladimir Putin, results of this deal?
Well, I don't think there's really a deal, because the thing that is so clear from the phone call is that they both have a different approach to this. One is thinking very short-term, Trump, and one thinks very long-term, which is Vladimir Putin. And Putin is said to have agreed to all kinds of things, and he may have agreed to them, but he hasn't fulfilled them. And you're quite right that the first thing, allegedly, was that he had agreed not to attack energy centers in Ukraine. And then it happened. 2-3 facilities were attacked overnight, and at least one hospital. So what is has to be drawn from that is that any hope which the Trump White House wanted, the hope that they said that they wanted this to lead into long-term talks, seems now to have gone far, far away and not to be in the intention of Putin at all. By the way, I think with that, we have to say it's very similar to what we heard about Gaza, where Israel has resumed full-scale hostilities in the Gaza Strip, despite the alleged agreement with Hamas, the three-phase peace agreement leading to a long-term negotiation, a long-term resolution. So I think I really throw my hands in the air and say, I don't see this going anywhere. And I think, I'm sorry to say, as things now stand in Ukraine, the war goes on.
From your perspective, why did Vladimir Putin agree to this partial ceasefire in the air if he would not like to halt his attacks on Ukraine? Do you see this as a humiliation of Donald Trump, because Vladimir Putin has promised to halt attacks on energy infrastructure?
I think it's very simple. I think it's part of Putin's mind games, and that they each think that they can outgame each other. But it's quite clear that Putin is playing a very long game. He's playing the game of Machiavelli, really. He is seeing where the weakness of the opponent is and where he can ensure the strengthening of his power at all costs. And to answer your game, yes, to your question, it is a game of cat and mouse. And Mr. Putin very much thinks he's the cat.
And also, I would like to cover with you a recent phone call between US President Donald Trump and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. What is your assessment of this phone conversation between both leaders?
Well, again, I'm sorry to focus on Trump, is that Trump said the most startling thing was that the US could take control of the Zaporizhzhia power plant and get it going again in everybody's interest. I mean, this in a way is fantapolitica, as the Italians would say, is fantasy, because I cannot see in terms of hostility, which don't seem like ending soon, American engineers going into Zaporizhzhia, and so therefore it's hypothetical. And I think that probably immediately after the event that Trump probably knew it, but it was a classic piece of gesture politics, which is really aimed at I'm sorry to say, at a domestic audience. And I think you would like me to say that it's aimed at taking into consideration the domestic audience with you in Ukraine. I don't think it is at all. I think it's the way Trump is projecting his second administration as the real tough guy, that all bets are off now. And I will tell you how I can make America great again based on the idea of the art of the deal. Well, so far it hasn't been terribly successful, has it? And actually the record of the first Trump presidency isn't terribly good. But that's what he's saying. I can do it. I can make a big, bold gesture. And we heard the manifesto even before he took office this time round, that I can resolve these conflicts in 24 hours. He's not going to be able to do it in 24 weeks. It's pretty clear. And I think for Ukraine, this is where the Europeans are strengthening their position. It's taking a long time and will take a long time. But the idea that you can negotiate about a chunk of real estate, as Trump sees it, in the middle of Europe, where you have no title, you're not the owner at all, is seeing. I'm looking for the right word. I think it's really bizarre. Is the word that I'm looking for. And looking in detail at the situation in Zaporizhia, and one of the directors of the plant has given an excellent interview to Le Monde, the French Le Monde, and saying how terribly difficult all this is to get the plant going again, even if it wasn't on the front line. And Russia intends to keep it on the front line, I think, for the foreseeable weeks and months.
Let's also cover Vladimir Putin. What do you expect from Putin in the next stages of negotiations, and do you feel that he could also face some pressure from his inner circle on these negotiations and a ceasefire deal?
Well, I'm no more expert than anybody, and probably way back on the inner circle, but the inner circle is what really counts, as you say. And he is looking to the medium to long term, and suddenly there are quite unmistakable signs that he's in a hurry. What does he want to do? He's got to secure the position, the economy. How long can it take the pressure that he has put the economy under? It's a full-blown war economy, 5 million people directly engaged in war, whether on the front line, whether in manufacture, whether in the finance. It is absolutely dependent, keeping it going at this rate, on China. Above all, the technical assistance that it's getting, plus supplies, as we know, from North Korea and bits and pieces in terms of drones, although I think the materiel support from Iran will be less and less significant. But why am I saying this? I'm saying this because I see this growing activity with Belarus, the growing activity in the Caucasus. He's trying to lay out his claim that this is the centrality of Russian power in the middle of Europe, that the Ukrainian Russian people are one people, they cannot be divided, and this is the central fact of the great power of Eurasia. This is it was hinted at in his famous Munich Security Conference speech, which was quite mild in its rhetoric in 2007. But more interesting is the high-flown rhetoric of the essay about the Ukrainian and Russian destiny, the destiny of their one and undivided people, in July 2021. And I think that for Putin, it must be quite a thought now. Is this really going to take him 10 years? Can he really get it done within the span of what would be the Trump administration? Though I have no doubt, by the way, that Trump will try and extend his mandate. He will try to ignore the normal electoral process in the United States, I think, come the time, and watch for that when it happens. But just to go back, is that Putin has got a time scale on what he wants to do. And that is why I think that he is going to be increasingly desperate. He wants to do a deal with America because that gets him away from the embrace of China, that in fact he looked at Russia, his Russia, after all, for all its mighty claims, is going to be a client of China. And I think this is very much in play. Now, what is happening with the inner circle is very, very difficult to discern, because there are lots of people that I would like to know more about and what they are saying to President Putin. But starting with Elvira Nabiullina, the governor of the central bank. I mean, can the economy sustain this for 6 months more? Because I think part of the plan in the next 6 months, and that's why he will be working with asymmetric tactics all over Europe, is to get sanctions lifted, particularly on gas and oil exports. if the discounted oil exports, which aren't hugely advantageous, but at least it's a sale, if there's some constraint on those to India, there's a problem. And he desperately needs to sell gas at price to Europe. Germany, Italy are the obvious ones, and they're going to have less interest in that.
Also, Bloomberg reported that Vladimir Putin would like the United States to halt security assistance for Ukraine and to halt providing Ukraine with intelligence. These are Vladimir Putin's terms for a ceasefire deal. What is your reaction to this?
Well, of course, I think I'm afraid to say that I'm pretty skeptical about Trump America, and it's the thing about as a Western European, I have to say the real difficulty with Trump's approach is that it's not that he's unreliable; he's completely unpredictable, and I think that this is where. I'm sure it's being discussed in my country, just in the north part of London, at the meeting of defence planners in Northwood. They're getting together to look at contingencies. I don't think, by the way, that they're talking about a peace monitoring or assurance force to go into Ukraine. I think that is just not there at the moment. But it really speaks more to your point that what do you do when you simply cannot rely on American solidarity in the Western European North Atlantic Alliance, namely NATO, and then if it's going to turn off its intelligence assets rather like a tap? Because after all, we have seen this crucially, and it played a critical part in the battle there over Kursk. Now, I think the turning off and turning on after the row in the White House, I think we're going to see all this again. And I think that the core European players, and they're led by a trio, it has to be said now, the odd trio, but interesting, are Starmer of my country, Macron, who is being very clear and forthright, and Friedrich Merz, because I think that there is a growing sensation in Germany of the real jeopardy that they're in for this, that this trouble, this on-off war with Russia is not going to stop, and it's not going to stop in Ukraine.
You just mentioned about the meeting of military planners in the United Kingdom. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer has been discussing this idea of deploying troops to Ukraine. Moreover, British special forces are being put on a high alert, on standby, to get ready for possible deployment to Ukraine. How can you assess the possibility of such mission being done without Russia's approval?
I think it's completely unrealistic. I think that actually that's the politics. And that's the advertisement, could I say. Because I think they'll be doing something really rather different. And it'll be more of what I've just been describing to you in terms of preparation, contingency, long-term intelligence. And long-term intelligence and communication. Communication is so critical outside America. Can they, with Galileo and other systems, actually obviate, in other words, move aside from GPS, but above all Starlink? Because we know Starlink was always there, and it's Musk's great weapon. And the more Musk indicates this, the more Western Europeans, for example, recognize how unreliable it is. And I think curiously, in Northwood, although we've had the advertisement, as I say, from Tkiie about we're thinking of this and we're thinking of that, I think there's no forced generation for groups of forces to go into Ukraine at the moment. But as for the SAS, I don't think you should believe half of what you hear about it. Because I think whatever the SAS has needed to do, it's done already. Can I leave it like that with you?
It's an interesting answer from you, to be honest. Interesting point. Yeah. And I will also like to cover with you the recent statement from French President Emmanuel Macron, because he said that there is no need of Russia's approval for European forces deployed to Ukraine. But from your perspective, how far away we are from this developments, from this mission deployed to Ukraine?
I think the mission will mutate. I think that they will declare they're prepared to do it, provided there is acknowledgement in the both warring parties. In other words, Russia and Ukraine. But I think there's something else going on. There is a growing sensation that we are in a state of near war in Western Europe. The hybrid attacks are continuing and are quite severe. By that I mean cyber, the surveillance of communication, and particularly power lines, gas supplies in the North Sea and the Irish Sea, and so on. So I think there is real thinking, particularly in London and Paris, about where you draw the line, where, if Russia intends to erode, and as we've described in this conversation, Putin is a war president, and it's a war policy. As much as Netanyahu, the war keeps him in power, and that's why he continues. Where do you draw the line? And I've had a very interesting conversation with a very successful former British commander, and I won't name him because it's quite sensitive what we talked about. And I would give you this view. And his view is that Britain and its allies, have to stick with Ukraine. No appeasement there, because the more you face up to it, then Europe can prepare its own defenses. And by the way, I think the serious European powers in the new context of security and resilience will have to prepare itself to work together outside NATO and outside the United States. Because what has been such a shock is that within days of taking office, that the new president of the United States, or renewed president of the United States, took no time at all to threaten two key allies, Canada and Denmark. And this is trouble. And so Europe has got to prepare, but it needs time to prepare. By focusing on Ukraine, it gives itself time. And the other thing is that, as I said, that Russia is a war economy. Therefore, the emphasis is on the military. It's got almost 2/3 forces engaged in one form or another with the Ukraine campaign. If it's going to do anything seriously to threaten Europe, to threaten Central Europe, to move further west, it has to come through Ukraine. Now, this is my friend telling this, and it's a very good point. And that's the second point about Ukraine. We've got the time factor. Now we've got the land factor. You have to draw the line at Ukraine. And I think it's very serious. I think it's very important. And I think that this is where Paris, Berlin, and London are going to have a big job to explain this to their populations within a matter of 2 or 3 months. That we are absolutely under threat. We are in a state of near war.
Let's also cover the Transatlantic alliance between the United States and Europe. There are some discussions that some European countries would stop buying American weaponry because of the lack of the credibility from the United States, the lack of trust. How could this change the balance of power around the globe and in Europe, and how could this unwillingness of the American president to protect some key allies, how could this be influential for the balance of power around the globe?
Well, in old-fashioned terms, it means a lot. But because you're absolutely right, there is going to be increasing reluctance to buy weaponry from the United States. And there are some very ugly contests beginning to emerge there. There's been bad history that America and its allies, which bought in a minority share into the F-35 aircraft project, I mean, it hasn't really worked. It's not had the prominence which it was expected to of the F-16, for example. F-16s are still being used because for various reasons the F-35 can't fill the gap. And it's never been fully operationally used. It's been used in operations, but sparingly by Israel, of course. This has been a bad experience. And we know that there are problems down the line which are emerging. As you probably know, there's the Global Combat Aircraft Program, GCAP, or for the Tempest aircraft, led by the Brits. Sorry, somebody was trying to phone me. Led by the Brits and with Japan and Italy in it. Now, America wants that. And they will either try and take it over in typical Trump fashion, or they will try and close it down because it's dealing with the sixth generation combat aircraft project. And they put an awful lot of money into what is known as NGAD. The NGAD sixth generation, they put billions into it already. It hasn't worked. So we can see I'll just give you one example. There is real competition emerging. I think that this will go on. I think the American military will support us, will support Europe, because they're very reluctant to follow the isolationist part. You know, in places like Afghanistan, where NATO has enabled an operation, the understanding, the friendships, the cooperation has been good. Now we've got people very, very polemical, like Pete Hegseth, in charge of the Pentagon, and they find it very, very difficult indeed to manage this. I think we're in for a fair amount of anarchy and chaos for about 2 or 3 years, and I can't see how it's going to settle with the Trump presidency at the moment. I think the weakness of America constitutionally, it must be worrying for everybody.
And my final question for you: do you really expect the U.S. to invade Panama Canal and Greenland?
And Canada, shall we do that one as well? No, it's nuts. I mean, the idea, Canada is the biggest sovereign territory governed by a Western-style open democracy. Canada and Russia are by far the two biggest nation states. It's absolutely ridiculous. I mean, he sends Trump, troops to the border, National Guards people to deal with migration and up to the Canadian border. This is fantasy stuff. I mean, I'm afraid to say I'm going to be rather rude. It's infantile as well. They've done a bit with Panama, bought back into 2 of the 5 ports, but I don't see that. And it will be, if he does, that he's got to be very careful. I mean, it's absolutely amazing to see one of the world's great superpowers has looked on as rogue nation now.
I ask you this question because NBC News recently reported that the White House has asked Pentagon to consider any kind of military options to regain control over the Panama Canal. What is your reaction to such a decision?
I don't think it would be much of a decision, but it shows that the mechanism doesn't work because it isn't. What are the stakes? Really, yes, quite a volume of traffic does go through the Panama Canal. It's yet another choke point. But and there is a certain amount of lashing around. We can see with the attack on the Houthis at the moment. What is going to happen with this if he goes on like this with Trump? He obviously, Hegseth would go along with this and plan this sort of thing. He's going to be doing too many things at once. So I discount Panama, but I think that again, which he seems, they say, part of the vanity of this particular very narcissistic regime in America, they seem to have no idea of what reaction they're having from the world, from allies. I mean, they've attacked their allies more than potential foes like Russia. And it is a very, very difficult moment. Is there some real policy that the real aim is to isolate China as much as possible, which is one view. It's a view from the Investors Chronicle, for example. If they are doing that, it's a very strange way to go about the business.
Thank you, Mr. Fox, for your time and for your support for Ukraine, and glory to Ukraine.
Thank you. Yeah. Bye.